show is in honor of. It's a show for veterans, for their veterans' families, and for the general populace. Today we have some special guests with us. We have Bill Christiana and Kellie Maisenbacher from the VA, and the subject that we're going to be talking about today is suicide prevention. Currently, the last data that we have shows on a yearly basis, we're losing over 6,000 veterans a year to suicide. So again, very critical subject. Actually, as I look at the data, it appears to me that the veterans population is pretty much tracking with the civilian population in that both are on the rise. So it is an issue in the general population, and the military or veteran population seems to be tracking it. Can you tell us a little bit about the suicide rate and what you folks are seeing?
Hi everyone. So as you were saying, veterans, we have about 6,000, over 6,000 veterans who die by suicide per year, and that's been the trend for quite some time now. Veterans are about 1.5 times higher risk for suicide compared to the general population. And in 2018, an important data point that we recently learned is that veterans who have been receiving care at the VA medical centers, the suicide rates have decreased by 2.5%.
Excellent.
But on the other hand, the bad news is that veteran suicide rates have increased among veterans who have not been receiving care from the VA. And so that's where suicide prevention is actually starting to take a little bit of a turn now. We are going to be moving towards a bit more community-based interventions, because we understand that 2/3 of the veterans who actually die by suicide per year are actually not receiving care at VA. And so that's something we've been paying attention to.
That's excellent. And I've seen that myself. Not every veteran does go to the VA. Not all of them are authorized to go to the VA. A lot of people don't understand that you could serve in the military, for example, in the reserves. And if you've never been federalized, you're not even a veteran. You're not officially a veteran in the federal eyes, so you're not authorized to go to the VA. But in general, those that go to the VA, as you've said, seem to have a better success rate. And I think part of that is because in the VA, it's specifically looking at veterans and looking for the potential issues that are there to try to address those. So again, very important subject. And this is something that our veteran population out there should think about. It's a preventative type of thing to go to the VA. You have that option. If you're an eligible veteran, you should really strongly consider it as part of your care, because the care there is crafted for veterans. Okay.
Absolutely. What I was going to say too is along with that, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today too, in relation to what you just said, is just letting people know about the services that are available on Staten Island specifically.
Absolutely.
We do actually have a VA clinic, and some veterans, when they find out, they're surprised, but it's there. It's located at 1150 South Avenue. It's the Staten Island VA Community Clinic. And we have a lot of services that are available there, and I just wanted to take a moment to tell you what they are. We have both psychology services, which is what I provide, psychotherapy. We have psychiatric medication management. We have primary care providers. We have audiology, optometry. We have diabetes nurse educators that come to the clinic. People can do their labs and blood work at the clinic. We have a social worker who's there, who serves the veterans that come in. And one of the things that we also have that people don't know about is we have a service that provides, while it's not happening now because of the pandemic, but it actually is transportation from the clinic to the VA medical center and back. So we actually can provide people with transportation for their appointments in Brooklyn. And so having those services available on Staten Island, I think, allows for people to come to the clinic for their mental health treatment, for their medical care, and can reduce some of the challenges of having to travel to and from appointments. And so my hope is that more and more people can take advantage of that, and can get in touch with myself or the clinic to schedule an appointment and get some of the services that we provide. In addition, there's the Staten Island Vet Center, and that is also available for veterans who served in a combat zone, and for who have other eligibilities, or other issues like military sexual trauma, and they can get their services there as well. And so there are resources, related to the VA specific in Staten Island, and we've been doing a little bit more to try to connect with the community, and provide those services and kind of get our information out there so more people take advantage of it.
There are limitations to that service. You talked about the transportation service, and being out in the vet community, the biggest complaint I've heard is getting to Brooklyn, or even worse, trying to get to Manhattan. Manhattan is just a nightmare. I tell people, if I have to go to Manhattan from Staten Island, it will take me 2 hours at least to get wherever I'm going in Manhattan, simply because of the transportation issues. And I don't drive to Manhattan, but that's still public transportation just to get to Manhattan. So that is still an issue. And while they do have the transportation service to Brooklyn or to, it's once a day. The biggest complaint I've heard is, well, I have to get there when that bus leaves and when I don't. Those are all still issues, but again, we appreciate anything that's out there. So transportation is still an issue here for veterans. We're all aware of that, but we're looking at different options throughout the veteran population to try to help that. What do you see as the major method of suicide among veterans and the population, I believe?
So what we know is that what causes the greatest amount of deaths by suicide are use of weapons, of guns. And what we do know is that veterans particularly use guns at a 70% to 75% rate, when they're thinking of a plan that they think about using their gun. And what we know about that and why that happens is because generally people who attempt suicide or go on to die by suicide use methods in which they're familiar with. So veterans are inherently familiar with weapons and feel most comfortable. Oftentimes, the weapon had been their buddy, had been something that had saved them. And so because they use higher lethal means, we tend to have higher deaths by suicide among the veteran population. 51% of all suicides are by firearms total. 70% are veterans, right? So compared to the civilian population, we see a significant jump for that. And so one thing that we're talking about a lot more recently, is lethal means safety. So how to be safe with your weapon. There's all sorts of initiatives going on around collaborations between mental health providers and gun shops and providing gun locks, for example. So we work with the community in handing out gun locks, and we have ones that have the veteran crisis line on it. So we've done some trainings out on Staten Island recently, where with the major hospitals. We've handed out gun locks to them, to family members, and the idea is that we want to create time between thought and action. So about 50% of people who have attempted suicide but have gone on to live have said that they have had 10 minutes between thought and behavior, so thought and action. So what we want to do, what part of locking up a gun does, is it creates time. The more time somebody has to think, the better off we are in saving lives. And so oftentimes, we'll hand out gun locks and we'll say, put the keys in a container, not a microwave safe one, put it in like a metal box, put water in it, put it in the freezer. especially if you're going through a mental health crisis, and freeze your keys, giving us some more time between, again, thought and action. Another thing that the VA does is we actually give out medication lock boxes for people who have thought about overdosing. So again, just locking up and securing those lethal means is something that we have had a huge focus on more recently as well.
The other thing that I've seen is if there is more time, too, there's more time for somebody else to intervene. And again, in my own case, this goes back probably to 2004, but I had one of my officers who basically at 38 had a stroke and was incapacitated and had to be removed from command. Very, very career-ending type of situation. And fortunately, I was able to intervene. I felt that he potentially was going to kill himself. And I had to call the VA hospital that he was in and say, you need to go to his room now, because I don't think he's going to come out of this unless somebody intervenes. I was in a different state, so I couldn't physically get there. But I just felt that this was going downhill. And the important thing there was we still had time. He tried to take pills and kill himself. So there was enough time for them to react and get to his room. He had locked his room and had taken pills to kill himself. So we were able to recover him from that, but very difficult situation. And for the families out there, if you are with your veteran and you see a difference, you really need to get help. You need to intervene. So can you tell us a little bit about what intervention methods are out there for somebody like a family member or somebody that sees something going on?
Certainly. So we actually have an acronym that we use for that. It's called SAVE. And I appreciate you sharing your story. And it's true that the people who are going to help us most resolve or decrease the number of deaths that are happening by suicide are the people who are closest to veterans. And so one of the things that we talk about is Operation SAVE, which is meaning looking at the warning signs. What are the things that you see that have changed or are different? Like you were pointing out, any sort of sleep changes, any sort of mental health changes, any sort of isolation. A stands for asking the question. We need to be direct when we ask the question. A lot of times there's a lot of stigma, right, around suicide, around mental health. And the more we beat around the bush, the more that stigma kind of seeps out. And, veterans are going to sense that. They're going to hear that. And they're going to give you the answer you want to hear, because nobody wants anybody to worry in their family. And so the more we can be direct and say, are you having thoughts of killing yourself? And being very direct with the person who's suffering and providing some support around that. And so the V means validation, right? Validating that person's feelings, what they're going through, asking them more questions, right? And not just, are you thinking of killing yourself, but also, how are you doing? How often are you having these thoughts? Or what is that struggle like even? Providing some validation. And then the E of SAVE is expediting care. And the best way for a family member to expedite care, there's two ways. Like you had mentioned in your example, contacting the VA is definitely one. The second way is contacting the crisis line. It's there 24/7. So if you're having this conversation with somebody, with a veteran who's been up all night, maybe woke up from nightmares, is having difficulty sleeping, it's 1 a.m., it might be a little harder to get a hold of somebody at the VA. And so calling the crisis line is really important, because they're going to get you help immediately. And when anybody calls the crisis line, so if a family member calls the crisis line, they're going to want to try to talk to the veteran first and see, does emergency services need to happen here, or can we have follow-up tomorrow from their local VA? So when somebody calls the crisis line, what happens is we get consulted at the VA. So the next day we're going to follow up with that person and we're going to say, hey, we know you had a hard night last night. Can you tell us what's going on? Is there anything we can do to help you? So calling, and the number is 1-800-273-8255, and you press 1 for veterans, and pressing 1 is really important because different things happen from the civilian line versus the veteran crisis line. So yes, that's the process in understanding what's going on with somebody, providing them with support, and then what to do next.
Really appreciate that, because for me, when I was making the decision, should I call or shouldn't I, was like, okay, I've got to do something. Who should I? And this was 2004. There was no real crisis number to call. The other person I called, because I was a brigade commander, I called my chaplain, who was working in parallel with me. But very important, and I'd ask again several times during this to repeat that number, because we've got to get the number out there, and people have to be not afraid to call. You'd rather be wrong on calling than have somebody die. So please repeat the number.
So the number for the Veteran Crisis Line is 1-800-273-8255. And then you press 1 for the Veteran Crisis Line. And again, very important that you press 1.
Yes. How about confidentiality? Because a lot of people are very concerned about confidentiality. I got referred for suicide prevention. How is this going to get out into the community or into my job, for example? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. Confidentiality is an important thing. And I know sometimes there's a concern, especially when people are on active duty, that their records are available to commanding officers. And while that may be true when someone's on active duty, once you become a veteran, your confidentiality is the same as it is for any other civilian. And your medical records are protected by HIPAA. And so we're not allowed to speak to anybody, your friends, your family, your employer, anyone outside the VA without your express written consent. And so those records will not be given to anybody else. And the only times that we ever are breaking confidentiality is if somebody's in imminent danger, meaning they want to harm or kill themselves or harm or kill another person. And in those situations, we're required to do that only to protect the person and bring them emergency medical services to help them to be safe.
Very important items. These are all of the types of items that I've heard and that I've experienced in dealing with veterans. The other item that I have is you talk about the decreased rate of veterans who go to the VA for treatment versus those that do not. Part of that, I think, is because of the VA tends to be kind of like a VSO to some people, in that you have other veterans there that you can talk to. In most cases, when you're sitting waiting in the waiting room, you're talking to somebody else because they've got an Army hat on or a Navy hat on, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard, whatever. But again, just talking in a lot of cases is important to these people and to all of us, because sorry, we're social. That's the way we are programmed to be. And sometimes just talking to somebody can be enough to get you over that hump that you're under. So again, very important to think about it in that way. One of the things in me talking to a lot of the younger veterans in particular, and I deal with a lot of younger veterans, particularly in the courts, because I'm a court mentor at the Veterans Court here in Staten Island. A lot of young veterans, I've seen a lot of issues in the courts with undiagnosed PTSD, and in one case, an undiagnosed traumatic brain injury. And to me, that's very, very bad. We're getting people out of the service and back into the community life that have not been diagnosed with the issues that they picked up during the service. I really think a part of that is due to the transition. And the transition from military back to community it's getting better, but it's still not where it should be. And one of the analogies I use is if you get out of prison, you have a parole officer. You get out of the military, you got nobody. Your whole family network of the military is gone, and basically you're out there on your own. Hopefully you have family or somebody to go back to, but I used my own transition. I was in Iraq for 2 years, 2 years, 2 months and a day. When I came back, I went to Fort Bragg. 5 days later, I was back on the street in New York City. Never saw a doctor, never saw anybody from the VA. I watched a couple of slideshows. That was my transition. That's a very difficult situation. And you talked about weapons familiarity. I can tell you, it took me about 2 months to get over looking for my pistol, because my pistol was kept right here for 2 years, and it was something you always checked. And it took a while to get, your body reacts to things and you remember things. And that's the thing I remember. I kept, where's my pistol? So that's the issue that I have with transition. And yes, it's gotten better, and there's several new legislation items out there at the federal level to help transition get better, have them more tied into community. But I really think we've got to do a better job there, or we're just pushing problems into the civilian world.
It's definitely a very challenging time. I think that people lose so many different aspects of their day-to-day life. The camaraderie, the brothers, the fellowship that comes with being in the military. There's an incredible amount of structure to your day and what you do. And you often have a mission and a common goal that you're sharing with other people. And then, like you said, all of a sudden, you go from all of that, several years of that. And especially if you're on deployment, the intensity is ratcheted up even higher.
Yes.
And then you come home and there's a loss of structure, a loss of camaraderie, a loss of that mission. And I think that that can be very disjointing for people. So it's an important time for people to come into the VA, for us to be available. We want people who are returning home or are transitioning out to please come in, establish a primary care doctor, speak to one of the mental health professionals that are on site. Please come. We want to be able to serve you. Each and every one of you. And so it is an important time for people to get connected. And so my hope is that more and more people do, whether that's at the CBOC in Staten Island, in Brooklyn, Manhattan, or wherever anyone is located, their nearest VA or clinic or hospital.
What I used to tell my reserve soldiers, because I had a reserve command, when you get back from deployment, you're usually still on active duty. That is your time to go to the VA and walk in and introduce yourself, get yourself your VA card, because at that point, you're going to go see a doctor. That's exactly what they do. They refer you to a doctor, and that is an opportunity to find out whatever issues you have and get them taken care of. You earned that. That is what you earned as a veteran. What are we seeing with regards to COVID and veterans, if anything?
So one positive thing that's going on during COVID, at least, is we are not seeing an increase in suicides at this time yet. And so that's a good thing that's coming out of this. And I'm going to say another good thing that's coming out of this. We are seeing an increase in veteran crisis line calls. And that is a good thing, in my opinion. That means people are utilizing the resource.
Yes.
It means that people are reaching out. And although what we are seeing is more isolation, more depression, more anxiety. But on the flip side, we're seeing people and veterans reaching out for help. And that's what we want. We want veterans reaching out for help. Utilizing the crisis line specifically during this time helps with a lot of things. Veterans who maybe are unsure about what care is happening in the hospital, if they're eligible for care, and things like that, because they're not sure if they can walk into the hospital during these times. Those questions are getting answered through the crisis line, we're getting people still enrolled in care, and more people enrolled in care probably at this point than before COVID. So as much as we are seeing more isolation and more depression and more anxiety, more people walking through for mental health services, we're glad to be seeing that people are reaching out for that help.
Absolutely. This is the opportunity for them. And the other thing I'd like to point out is that while in a lot of cases you may not be able to physically go to a facility or go into a facility, telemedicine now has pretty much taken off as a result of this. And you can talk to your primary care physician by telemedicine, just the same way we're doing this show, actually. And it's a good, effective way to communicate and get your issues taken care of before they become major issues and, again, have issues in the civilian world.
To go along with that, I mean, one of the things about what we know about suicide prevention is that about 90% of people who complete suicide actually have a diagnosable mental health condition. And as a consequence of that, it's a place where we can prevent that from happening by connecting people to services. And so right now, with all the isolation and the changes and the challenges that the pandemic has resulted in for all of us, a lot of people are calling for that treatment, for that help. And we want more people in need to reach out for that help because we want to provide those services. We have, like you were mentioning with telemedicine, I do my mental health visits now, either by telephone or by a video platform within the VA, and a lot of other providers do the same. All of us are doing those services. And so one of the things you mentioned earlier about some of the transportation challenges, we're now able to overcome that because of how we're practicing. And I think that, we have an opportunity to reach people probably more easily than we ever did before in terms of that. And it's about trying to provide those services for those conditions and for those veterans so that we can address suffering, we can address depression, anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance use. And I think that moving forward, I just want people to know that the services are there via telemedicine, like you said, and we're committed to sort of bringing them to your home, whether it's by phone, by video, or some other means.
The important thing I think that we have to point out to folks is you don't just get better. There has to be an intervention. Somebody has to break the cycle of depression or whatever the issue is. And the only way for you to do that is to reach out. Could you again give us the prevention number?
Yeah, so the Veteran Crisis Line is 1-800-273-8255. Then you press 1 to reach the Veteran Crisis Line, and that's available 24/7. They also have a chat line, so you can visit their chat line on their website, and you can text them as well through the chat. So there's multiple ways to be able to contact the crisis line.
Well, I'd like to thank you both for being on, and I thank you for all of your input. This is a very important topic to our veteran community, to, again, the veterans' families. And it's important to me also.